Hello, my name is Marisol. I'm Marisol Quintanilla. I'm a professor of nematology at Michigan State University. What I'm going to talk today does not represent the views of my employer. I'm going to tell the story of COVID and COVID mandates and my road to an exemption. So an outline of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about background at the beginning, how this all started, the lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, and how it affected me and the university. And my story applies to many others. How did I get an exemption? How did our church, our Seventh-day Adventist church, react? How is it going now? And update a little bit about what's going on with the vaccines now. Relate this to the example of Daniel and how they have taken advantage of this. The government has taken advantage of COVID to reduce our liberties in other areas. So in the beginning, how did this all started? As you know, this is a bit controversial. I am of the opinion, and I think there's quite a bit of evidence for this, that the COVID came from a lab in China. They were doing gain-of-function research. It's possible it came from an natural animal origin. That's still in debate. But the first cases were happening in China. And I remember in the news, people were very afraid, and they were making a big deal about this. Everything was still okay socially until it hit Italy, and people were dying in Italy, and the news really made a big deal out of it. And I remember noticing that people were very afraid. And then there was the first case in Washington State. I was here in Washington State. Of course, I work and live in Michigan State, in the state of Michigan. But I was here in Washington State because I had a meeting, a professional meeting here. I travel quite a bit for work. And when I was here, they were reporting on the first case, I believe, in a nursing home. And I believe that first case did end up in mortality. And when I came back to MSU and it was all in the news and I saw my students in the lab, I did feel like I had, maybe because I was tired and the jet lag and not sleeping all night, I was feeling a little bit bad and my nose was running. And I just said, well, I was just in Washington State, maybe I have COVID. I said a little bit of a joke, not a very good joke, but I remember even at the beginning thinking and even telling my students that I thought that the news were making too much of a big deal out of this, that the mortality rate was probably not as high as they were reporting, and it seemed to be affecting people who were already ill and very old, that the children were not being affected, young people and healthy people were not being affected. And I remember thinking that the news were not being very balanced about this, that they were making more of a big deal of this than they should. I thought about this since the beginning. Then the lockdown started. First, I believe the borders in China, the flights from China were kind of reduced, and it almost like the whole world started copying what China was doing. China started locking people. I think they locked Wuhan. And it was like a game of copycat. And people started locking down. And there was very little discussion or consideration for things like liberty of movement or freedom of association or people's, basic rights. It was like, it seemed like COVID was the only thing that mattered at the time, which did not make much sense to me. Finally, they decided to mandate, they were locking down and people were very afraid and businesses were locked down, which had a terrible effect in the economy, terrible effect for children that couldn't go to school. So many people lost their jobs, so many businesses broke. It was socially, economically, health-wise, it was having a terrible effect on everyone. And they were waiting for the vaccine to be produced. The vaccine was the big savior that was going to save the economy, and everything will be okay once the vaccine was released. And I was thinking at the time that there should be more options than this, that more education should be given, that people should be told that they should be exercising, eating healthier, be made clear about what are the risk factors, and also other treatments for COVID needed to be explored. Because not much was being done. People seemed to, when they got COVID, were told to stay home, and then people would get very, very sick. And when they go to the hospital, many times it was too late. And some of the treatments that were being used, especially at the beginning, like ventilators, really did, in many cases, did more harm than good. So it all seemed strange. It all seemed strange. Finally, the vaccine happened. And it was, at the beginning, it was not mandatory. It was voluntary, and people were in big lines trying to get the vaccine. I was skeptical. I was thinking, well, this is a new experimental vaccine. It's a new technology. It's with mRNA. My own body is going to be making this spike protein. The dosage is not controlled. And I thought to myself, also, since the beginning I thought this, that likely the virus would adapt to the vaccination immunity. And I thought the more people get vaccinated, if you have mass vaccination, especially of people that are not very vulnerable to COVID or serious effects of COVID, all it would do is cause selection pressure, force the virus to adapt to the vaccination immunity. Since the virus would hit a wall, all viruses, all COVID variants that were effectively controlled by the vaccine would go extinct. And only those few variants that were able to adapt to the immunity of the vaccinated would be able to reproduce, do well, and move through the population, just purely through selection immunities, selection pressure. Very similar what happens to bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. The more you use antibiotics, the more bacteria become resistant. Also very similar to herbicide-resistant weeds. If you spray weeds with the same herbicides, for example, Roundup, for decades, eventually many different weeds will become Roundup resistant, and then you spray them with Roundup and nothing happens to the weeds. So I thought this is a process. I'm a nematologist, and this also happens with nematodes. They overcome the resistance of nematode-resistant varieties, like soybean cyst nematode. There's a history of this. So I thought to myself, this will happen with this vaccine, and it would be smartest if this was voluntarily given, and only the people who are high risk, that have high risk factors, let's say obese, higher age, etc., those would be encouraged to take the vaccine, and those with very low risk factors that close to zero, young people, healthy people, that they should be encouraged not to get the vaccine. All this voluntary. But the medical professionals were not thinking this way, and this was strange to me. This was strange to me. It was not possible that I could be thinking about this better than they could. I thought they must know this. They must know that coronaviruses adapt quickly. They must know this. But apparently they either didn't, or I could come up with many reasons, but I don't understand all the reasons. But I saw that they decided to mandate the vaccines on everyone, even those that were at very low risk. And this happened in my university. My university, Michigan State University, decided to mandate the vaccine on everyone, students, faculty, etc. And if you did not get vaccinated, you would be dismissed as a student or fired. The only way was to get an exemption, a religious exemption or a medical exemption showing that you had some allergic reaction to some of the ingredients or something like that. And I thought to myself, I am not going to get this vaccine. They can fire me, but I am not going to get it. The more they were forcing, the more this was looking fishy to me. This was looking very strange to me. Why were they forcing something that if everybody got vaccinated, it would, instead of help the people who are vulnerable, it would, at the contrary, make them more susceptible, since the vaccine will stop being effective to them. And I thought this is not logical. And I was not sure what would be the safety of this. It was very short testing process. It was new technology. My own cells making the spike protein. Was the spike protein safe? What effect did it have on autoimmunity? I wasn't sure. And I thought, I'm not willing to be a guinea pig. They can fire me if they want. I was severely tried. Everybody was forcing me or trying to persuade me. My department chair, my supervisor at the time, would meet with me and would tell me, Marisol, look at polio. Polio doesn't exist anymore because everyone pretty much got vaccinated. I said, coronavirus is not polio. It adapts. It adapts very quickly. It will overcome the immunity, and we'll have variants, and it'll break through. And I was being told, I was called many times by multiple people, anti-vaxxer. I was screamed at, not by my supervisor. My supervisor was always professional, but with pressure, but by many people, including people that do similar, colleagues, or called things like anti-vaxxer, or that I was killing people, that I was guilty for killing people for not getting vaccinated, those things. And that didn't work on me. I wasn't going to be persuaded by those kind of bully tactics. Only logic and science was going to work with me, and the things that they were saying did not make sense to me. I was looking at firing in the face. I was thinking how to do it. My husband wasn't very persuaded about the vaccines, but he was telling, I remember clearly telling me, Marisol, we have a son with Down syndrome. He's had 3 heart surgeries. We need health insurance. We have 3 children. We need the health insurance. You can't lose your job. Just get that vaccine. It can't be too bad. And maybe get the J&J. That one seems, at least it's not the mRNA one. It's a little bit different. Just get it, and that way you won't get fired. We need We need funding. We need health insurance. I said, no, they can fire me. I am not going to get it. I got pressure from all sides and wasn't sure how to go about this. I saw that freedom was not being respected. So the mother of my son-in-law, she told me, you know, there's gonna be a talk in the village church in Berrien Springs about how to get vaccine exemptions. I didn't know about this. I lived in Lansing, worked at MSU. I didn't know about this event. And I said, well, that event, I'm gonna go to it. So I went to the event in the village church, and it was wonderful. Conrad Vine presented, a wonderful lawyer presented legal arguments, and many people, Leila Lewis, many people presented different arguments. The most helpful to me were Dr. Zirkle with the legal arguments. I thought to myself, the only way that this will work, of course with the help of God, is legal arguments. Because I thought to myself, this must be mostly about liability. MSU must be interested in mandating this, thinking that it'll protect them through liability. For if somebody died of COVID, they could say, you know, we took all the steps necessary, so protect themselves. So I thought legal arguments are the ones that are gonna work. So I paid very hard attention, and also they provided a website with sample letters, and I took one of the sample letters after the event was ended. After I went home, and I sat down with my husband and started working on the letter. And my husband was very helpful. He gave me some ideas. Many parts in the letter were ideas that he gave me. So I got the laws, and then I got MSU, Michigan State University, has several parts of the rules, etc., that protect religious freedom, that protects freedom of speech, etc. So I use all of this. I use federal laws, state laws, and MSU protections and policy. So I put this all together and submitted my exemption. So I saw that the liberties were severely threatened, not only in my university, but all over the world. I would say Canada was one of the worst, okay? And the environment changed. I thought of like Nazi Germany, when people started losing their freedom to do things, to move. You know, the Jews at first, you know, people were encouraged not to buy things from the stores. Then they had to wear a star, and then they were moved to the ghetto. So I thought to myself, this is very strange. People vaccinated that are unvaccinated are beginning to lose their job. I heard in the news saying things like they should not get organs transplanted. Maybe they shouldn't be treated medically. They cannot be allowed into restaurants. Maybe they can't cross borders. I think in Canada they even froze some accounts, bank accounts. So this is getting very scary. And there was threats of freedom on free speech, freedom of religion, bodily autonomy. People were not being allowed to have the informed consent. The same things I was noticing also, that some things that I was saying, some things that I was thinking, and that what I was reading by going through past scientific articles and current scientific articles, things that I was figuring out, they were being censored and condemned. But months later, they would be admitted and they would be allowed. So I thought to myself, what I'm thinking, what I'm realizing is the truth, but it can't be admitted as the truth until the right people say it. Like a great example is a recent Fauci paper in which he admits that the vaccine, the coronavirus vaccine, the COVID vaccines were suboptimal, and compares them to the influenza vaccines, and admits that the virus adapts to the immunity, and that coronavirus adapts. Everything that I was thinking from the beginning, he admits, and this is a very recent paper. So I thought to myself, yeah, if he says it, then it's okay. But he said this recently, only this was a couple months ago. But at the beginning, it was anathema to say this. So I'm gonna read some parts of the exemption letter, as not all of it, but just some main parts. And also, I want people to have this letter, so if this ever happens again, it can serve as a help to others. Okay, so some background there. Let me see the light. You see there, it says that I had to put that I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. That was not in my original letter. This was not in my original letter. In my original letter, I just put because of my religious beliefs. But MSU answered back to my letter and said, what religion are you? What denomination are you? And they said, you need to include that in the letter. And I responded immediately because I figured what they were thinking. And I said, the religious liberty laws in the United States, the federal laws, and in the state are based on the religious beliefs of an individual and not based on your church. So therefore, it should not matter what my church's stance are. I am protected as an individual. And that is something that they were actually thinking of, to deny my exemption letter, because most churches wrote statements saying that they supported the vaccines. In fact, I am not imagining this. I know this for a fact. I know this and I have proof. I attended just a few weeks after when they requested this, there was a training in my university about dealing with exemption letters and COVID. There was a training for the medical school there, and the university physician gave the talk, and I registered for it, and I attended. I attended it on Zoom. It was on Zoom. And they said many things, but among them, they said that a good way to deny religious exemptions was to see what denominations people were, and then looking at the statements of those denominations, and if the denominations supported the vaccines, to use this to deny their religious exemption. I immediately wrote back. In Zoom, you can be texting as people are talking. I wrote back and I said, religious liberty laws protect the individual, and it doesn't matter what your denomination believes. And this surprised them. They responded to this, and then it became kind of a debate between the speaker and me about this. But I can tell you, I am 100% sure that they used the church's statements to deny religious exemption, because there were trainings educating people how to deny religious exemptions because of the because it's the statements of different denominations. So it's not imagination, it is reality. This really happened. So I use the text that says that my body is the temple of God in 1 Corinthians 6:9, and I use that as Adventists, we're actually very health conscious. Most Adventists, I mean, if you're a good Adventist, you can't smoke, no drinking alcohol, no caffeinated drinks, etc. And I have never smoked. I have never drank alcohol. I don't drink coffee, and I don't eat unclean foods. We know that in Leviticus 11 it says what animals we should eat and what animals we should not eat. And I have never eaten pork in my life. And I use this to show that I was consequential, that I was practicing this belief that our body is the temple of God and that we should keep it holy. In fact, the way that God communicates with us is through our mind. And our mind is part of our body. Therefore, if our mind is clouded by things that we do to our body, drinking alcohol, doing drugs, etc., then we cannot appropriately think, we cannot appropriately control our behavior, and we can also not appropriately listen to God's voice, understand the Bible, or communicate with God and with others. Therefore, what we do to our body affects our mind and affects our spiritual life. So I make this point. So I also made the point that this vaccine was experimental, that it was new, and that it had some risk. It had some risk, even at the beginning. This letter was written in August of 2021. Even at the beginning, there was already reports of myocarditis. This was written in August 2021. Myocarditis, pericarditis, blood clots, allergic reactions, and even some death. Those were reports even back then. So I have informed myself of the risk and the complications of COVID, and also the known and unknown risk of the vaccines. And I decided not to get the vaccine. So I spoke about the different laws of health, and leaders of our church, such as Ellen G. White, our health message, and about that health depends on fresh air, sunshine, good diet, etc., trust in God. And said I would follow this. So I also said that I pointed out that in VAERS, at that date, which was in August 30, 2021, there was 13,000 vaccine-related deaths reported, 55,000 hospitalization, and most important to me, 18,000 permanently disabled because of the vaccines, or things that happened immediately after the vaccine and were reported where the vaccine was suspect in this. I pointed out that I had COVID. I did have COVID, therefore I had natural immunity. And I discussed a paper, a very important paper, which was amazing to me, that this paper was not widely talked about in the media. It was amazing to me. There was a paper of SARS, for the original SARS-CoV-1, which, SARS, I think in 2003, 2004, it was in Asia, several people got it. So I pointed out a paper that showed this one right here, Quo 2020, Quo et al. 2020, showing that people who got SARS-CoV-1 still had immunity 12 years later. Okay, they still had immunity to that original COVID. And Also, there was papers coming out that natural immunity was effective and that it was more effective than that was provided by the vaccine. So I put scientific papers here and also pointed out that even people that I knew that had gotten COVID several months before were donating plasma, and the plasma had antibodies after getting COVID. That's a very firm proof that natural immunity was effective. Long time, for long periods after getting the infection and recovering. So I pointed out several studies. I could keep on going forever. And I put, because I have natural immunity and it's robust and long-lasting, I have nothing to gain from obtaining the vaccine that MSU University is forcing me and others to take. And I thought the medical risk that I was being forced to take did not benefit others. Another thing that I noticed is that nobody, absolutely nobody, was liable for any problems that I would have. The university was not holding themselves liable to any side effects I might have from the vaccine. The government wasn't. The vaccine companies had exemption of liability. So I could not find who would be responsible if I did have a side effect or a problem with the vaccine. So I said, I'm not willing to risk my health and medical autonomy to satisfy the desires of an authoritarian employer. This is discrimination, since I am of no risk to others, and I should not be made to submit spit every week. MSU was requiring all people who were unvaccinated to submit a spit test in order to demonstrate that they didn't have COVID every week in order to remain employed if you were unvaccinated. Regarding that spit test, I did get a call from an MSU administrator calling me for a meeting to fire me because I wasn't following all the different regulations, and I was not submitting spit, and I wasn't vaccinated. And long story, I did not get fired, but I was called to a meeting in order to do this, in order to dismiss me. Okay, so I pointed out laws of the United States protecting religious freedom. It says, therefore, an employer should ordinarily assume that an employee's request for religious accommodation is based on a sincerely held religious belief, practice of observance. And I pointed out rules in the university policy. I pointed out federal laws, okay? And I said, when I signed my contract, I did not surrender my religious belief or my medical autonomy. I have never consented to this coercion. The university is making religious tests by mandating DEI training. This is something I'm going to be talking in the next one. Besides vaccines, they're mandating trainings that go directly, that are diametrically opposed to the beliefs of religious people. So MSU is removing medical autonomy from their faculty and students. The Constitution, in addition to many laws that protect people, the Constitution protects people, and this has made the United States a great nation. Liberty is what made the United States great. These mandates and limitations of liberty are against my conscience and go against the principles of this great nation. And I pointed out that the vaccines were experimental and we should be allowed informed consent free of coercion, and that this was unethical to be coercing people. And said, finally, it is terrifying that this university and many institutions in the United States are ignoring liberties of conscience, speech, association, religion, and medical autonomy. The university feels comfortable creating an underclass that cannot do what others can do. They can be fired or have different rules placed upon them. This is happening in all the nation. This could lead to limitations in ability to buy, sell, associate, therefore preparing the way for the end times and the mark of the beast. Revelation 13:16 says, and he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand and in their forehead, and that no man might buy or sell, save that he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. I am not saying that this or the vaccine is the mark of the beast. I am just saying that this seems to be laying the groundwork for oppression, removing liberties, and possible persecution for those who do not comply with religious mandates. The United States is a great nation that has provided refuge for persecuted people all over the world and was founded by people fleeing oppression and religious persecution in Europe. It is liberty that has made the United States great. And if liberty is lost, there will be nowhere to escape to. I love this great and beautiful country. Let's keep it free. So that was my letter. How did the church react to this? Unfortunately, the church did not react that great. I went to, when I was thinking of getting my religious exemption letter, I went to the pastor of my church. I asked for a letter, kind of knowing what the results would be of asking. I kind of more asked for the letter more as a experiment than, more to test my theory. And they told me, the pastor told me that they had been told to not waste their bullets on this. That do not waste their bullets on this, that they were saving the bullets for the Sunday law, and that this was not a religious liberty issue, which was incredible to me because it is a religious liberty issue, because God provided us liberty to choose, and our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. I believe it is perfectly fine for people to get vaccinated, and there will be many vaccinated people in heaven. I am not morally opposed to vaccine, but what I am significantly morally opposed to is coercion. And people should not have been coerced to take an experimental medical treatment that for some groups of people did not provide benefits and provided risk. So the church said that this was not a religious liberty issue, and that they supported vaccines and put out the statement, and I was told that they would not waste their bullets on this. I responded with, if you don't use your bullets now, maybe your gun is going to be rusted when you need it, because you need to practice and you need to use it. So, how did other denominations and churches react? Pretty much the same, okay? And I mentioned the story that the MSU trainings were, there was MSU trainings on how to reject people's statements or exemptions because of the church statement. So they were being weaponized against us. The denominational statements in support of the vaccines were being weaponized against us to reject our statements and fire us. How is it going? The vaccine effectiveness? Not that great. Even Fauci has admitted that the vaccine is suboptimal. This is a paper from the Cleveland Clinic. I have provided the reference right there. Shrestha et al., 2019, and Open Forum Infectious Diseases. And this was data from the Cleveland Clinic. This is cumulative incidence of COVID-19 cases. So these are COVID cases in this axis. And, and here is the dosages, okay? So we can see the least COVID cases is with 0 dosage. 1 dose, more COVID cases. 2 dose, more. 3 dose. In other words, it seems that the vaccine is increasing the chances of people to get COVID. If there is effectiveness, it's early on. It was in the past, but just like I suspected, the virus, now has variants that are very adapted to vaccine immunity and are not doing a very good job. The vaccines are not doing a very good job to protecting from COVID infection. I know that they're saying that there's protection against severe disease and death, but I think even this is in dispute right now. However, just the main factor that was being used, the main argument that was being used for the mandates was that it was going to protect others, that I had to get the vaccine so others wouldn't get it. Well, this totally undoes the argument, because people that get vaccinated still get COVID. Therefore, they're not protecting anyone. And there's data, this paper and several others, that actually show negative effectiveness. So, little bit of Daniel's story. And this is not necessarily related to vaccines, but if we looked about Daniel's story, you can see that Daniel in the Bible with his friends, they were offered to eat the king's meat, the king's food, and the king's drink. They had several options. There, the food, many of it was unclean. I'm sure there was pork. There was clearly the Bible prohibits eating pork. Some of the food was sacrificed to idols, and the drink, it was probably alcoholic beverages. And Daniel and his friends were raised in believing families that took the Bible seriously. They did not eat unclean foods, and they said no. We know that the eunuch that was in charge of them was so afraid, thought that he was going to maybe be killed if these young men were not healthy and were not robust when they're training. And Daniel said, test us for 10 days to see how we do. And they did better. Now, when later on, in a few chapters later, when there was the statue, that golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar made, who was standing? And the only people who were standing was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the same friends of Daniel who did not eat that food. So the health and obeying the laws of health are necessary in order for us to pass the test of worship. The vaccine is not the test of health. However, the Bible, it does have test of health. It says what we should eat and what we should not eat, what we should drink and what we should not drink. And clearly, it describes that that our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit and should take care of our health. I did not feel it was appropriate to take this vaccine as it had risks for me, and the data did not show that it had benefits to me. And I felt it was not safe and not a wise decision. And I decided that it was against my conscience because of this. And I was not willing to sacrifice my health to satisfy the requirements of a tyrannical government or employer. So it was not about the vaccine, it was about health. and coercion, liberty. And the people who do not take care of their health and do not take God's description, God's requirements of health seriously, will they be able to stand up when the worship test comes? I would think that that would be in question. I think that Daniel's story shows that health is it's comes before that health, putting our health first comes before the test of worship. So we know the 8 laws of health. What are the things we need to do for our health? And nutrition, exercise, drinking water, not alcohol, not caffeinated drinking, not soda pop, water. Sunshine, being in the sunshine helps with vitamin D. It helps with mood also. And temperance, eating even the good things, doing it in moderation. A for air, fresh air, breathing fresh air. It's good to have a window open when you sleep, air out the house, breathe fresh air. Outdoor air is almost always healthier or better quality than indoor air. And finally, the last T, trust in God. Trust in God help us to have peace so that we don't suffer the effects of stress, okay? Okay? I have noticed that they took advantage of the COVID situation to take many other liberties from us. Liberty of movement, travel, some churches were closed, and after the COVID mandates started the DI mandates, and now we are being compelled or forced to affirm certain ideologies, like the gender ideology that goes directly against reality, biology, biblical teachings, and truth. So they took advantage of this in order to step in on other liberties. And it's almost like people have gotten used to being told what to do, being told where they can go and where they cannot go, what they can say and when they cannot say. And I'm thinking, no, we should not get used to it. We should say no to this, and we should say the truth, and we should not lie in order to get advantage. Okay? So I learned a couple things about human behavior. I learned that there's some certain percentage of the population that are very easily manipulated by the news media, etc. And there's some that are too cowardly for standing up for the truth or to speak up. Some that really enjoy snitching on others. I saw this several times, I had a great technician, a fantastic technician, and he was walking in the hallway in the basement of it, where my lab is at. He was walking with his mask down and his nose out. It's kind of hard to breathe in the mask. And somebody saw him committing the horrible crime of walking with his nose out of the mask. And he was reported to the department chair. An email was sent to the whole department. Someone in our department is walking in the hallway with the nose out of the mask. I was contacted and told that people in my lab were not obeying the COVID rules of MSU. And I had a meeting with my great technician, and I said, well, you know that I'm not requiring this of you, but I guess you better cover your nose. There's some people telling on you. He got pretty sick of that, because that was, sent to the whole, sent to the whole department, the whole thing. And he started looking for other jobs and left. Not because of anything that I did, but the way that he was treated. So some people like to snitch and control others. A few people say the truth and are brave to stand up. So what happens when the group is demonized? Like the unvaccinated were demonized. What happens? I can think my husband is a Serb, from the Bosnian War. And there's a term called Balkanization. Everybody was together and everybody was friends, but they started saying, those people are Muslim. They do such and such. And then those people are Serbs. They do such and such. And then they started talking about each other and demonizing each other. And the neighbors that were friends, children that were friends and playing together, were willing to kill each other because they demonized each other. This is not safe. We need to treat each other well. We should not be demonizing other groups. And lastly, in the common human behavior is the common good problem. I believe that the common good was the #1 excuse for the many violations of liberty and unethical treatments done during the pandemic and in the past. The common good, I'm going to give you a summary of this. The common good is part of the Catholic social doctrine. And in the 1300s, Thomas Aquinas came up with it. It assumes that a city or community is more important than an individual, and that the well-being of a group is more important than each individual. At the contrary, the Anglo-Saxon way, or the more Protestant way to view it, is that the general interest results from the sum of the interests of each. So if I'm kind to you, if I judge you correctly, and every person in front of me, it has a sum, this ends up as best for society. The common good says you can sacrifice the benefit of the person right in front of you if it benefits the group. And that causes several problems. A great example, or you could say a bad example of this, is the Nazis. The Nazis, in the 25-point program of the Nazis, in point 24, there's a clear part that says, the common good over individual good, or common interest over individual interest. And in every atrocious government, in every evil dictator, almost everyone has used the common good as a justification for their atrocities. Okay, Hitler used the common good for the benefit of society. We need to get rid of these Jews. You can see it in the story of Jesus. What did Caiaphas say? What did Caiaphas say? He says, it is better for one man to die than for the whole nation to perish. That was Caiaphas using the common good. We saw it during COVID. Okay, we saw it during COVID, that you could sacrifice the health of an individual. Maybe the vaccine was not going to benefit me because I already had natural immunity, but it was supposedly going to protect the society for the common good of society. You need to break a few eggs to make an omelet. That's another way to say it. So, the common good sounds good, but it is bad, okay? So a great example of the common good also was the intubation of patients. Doctors, a great article here, I provided the link, says that a doctor is quoted saying, we were intubating patients very early, not for the patient's benefit, but in order to control the epidemic and to save other patients. That felt awful. They were thinking that intubating people was going to control COVID because less air will be distributed. In other words, if you had COVID and you were intubated, your air was, when you were breathing, your air was not spreading in the room. It was being kept in the ventilator. In other words, they were literally risking people to die because majority of people, a lot of people in the ventilators died, and we know that the ventilators was not beneficial to people. They were sacrificing people in order to prevent other people from getting COVID. And that is a great example of the common good. And that story came out in the Wall Street Journal, okay? So, conclusion. Let's stand up for freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and bodily autonomy. We should be provided informed consent. We need to be able to debate and challenge things in order to find the truth. Censorship reduces innovation. And finally, the common good sounds good, but it is bad. And thank you very much for your invitation.